It looks like everybody is on. I think we are ready.
All right, sounds good. Well, thank you everybody that's on the call. We have quite a few people on the call this morning. Looks like we have about over 80 people currently signing in. So again, thank you for joining us. My name is Paul Sell. I'm the Re-Engagement Systems Manager here at the Youth Development Division, and I have the pleasure today to help facilitate this conversation around the youth grants and RFA process. In just a few moments, we're going to go ahead and introduce the YDD staff. While we're getting ready to do that, I would ask that the participants in the call, if you wouldn't mind putting who you are and what organization you represent into the chat, just as a quick introduction while we're going through that. And before I begin this morning with some staff introductions, I would first like to acknowledge the many tribes and bands who call Oregon their ancestral territory and honor the ongoing relationship between the land, plants, animals, and people indigenous to this place we call home. We recognize the continued sovereignty of the 9 federally recognized tribes who have ties to this place and the subsequent bands within those tribes, and want to thank them for continuing to teach us how we might all be here together. So with that, I see a bunch of people putting their name and who they represent in the chat, so thank you. But if Brian Detman, our director, is not here, I'll turn it over to Cord to begin the staff introductions.
Hey everybody, this is Cord Bucher. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm the interim chief of staff with YDD, and I've also worked with a number of folks I see here in the chat on grants in the past. So we're really happy you're able to join us. Paul, I guess, should I just pick the next person from the team to introduce themselves?
Yes, if you wouldn't mind.
Sure, I'll nominate Molly Burns.
Good morning, everyone. It's nice to see some familiar names. My name is Molly Burns, and I am the Re-Engagement Grants Manager. Abe?
Good morning, everybody. My name is Abraham Magana, and I'm the Community Grants Manager. Thank you for joining us today.
And good morning, everybody. My name is Jared Shaw. I'm Workforce Policy Analyst and Grants Manager with YDD. Great to have you all here.
All right, well, thank you to the staff for introducing themselves. And then Jared, if Brian is able to sign on, please let me know and we'll pause to have him introduce himself. Brian Detman is our director for the Youth Development Division, and I'm sure he's probably tied up in another meeting right now, but he does like to join us during these, so we'll make sure he gets introduced if he's able to join us. So just a couple things today before we get started. We are recording this. Our hope is to post the most current version of this information session online later this week or early next. So please do visit the YDD website for that information. You also see on the bottom of this introduction slide that the information contained in this presentation is accurate to the date indicated at the bottom of each slide. We've done multiple different information sessions throughout the past week and a half or so, and we've made some edits as we've received feedback from the different organizations and community members that we've met with on that. Also want to acknowledge Bill Hansel. He is another youth policy analyst for the Youth Development Division. He is not feeling well today, so he's unable to join us, but he does send his appreciation for you joining us today. So before we begin, just a little bit of reminder of, obviously we're in that Zoom meeting format. So if you can please use your chat function, we want to be able to track the questions and address them as they come through. Cord has volunteered to be kind of managing that. So he'll answer some of the questions while we're doing that. And then we'll also revisit it both during the presentation and come back. And again, if you don't mind muting yourself when you're not presenting, would be great. That way we can facilitate and run relatively quickly through this presentation and information. We also say, please feel free to use the video and response options based on your preference. So if you want to turn your video off, that's fine with us. Just want to acknowledge that if you want to use that, that is great. The agenda is pretty straightforward. We do want to answer some of the burning questions that we believe are out there, and then we'll cover a little bit of who YDC and YDD is and who we are, and then go through some of the funding and application information within that, and then we dive a pretty deep look into what the grants specifically are that we're going to be offering this spring, and then also discuss a little bit of a youth grant planning tool, the timelines, and then we end on a Q&A discussion with the group. One thing to note, we do like to always end these community information sessions with some positive stories. So if you have something that you'd like to share with the group, please be thinking about that, and we'll open up the floor towards the end of the presentation. We've heard some pretty amazing stories thus far with this work. So some of the burning questions that we know are out there is, when is the RFA going to be launched? The RFA is being finalized currently. We're in the final stages going through the procurement and legal process with the state. And so planned launch is April, May. We don't have an exact date because that timeline isn't necessarily exact in terms of how long it takes for that process. How long will the RFA open? Our intent is to keep it open as long as possible, with up to 60 days. And we're trying to do that based on several of our elements around our council and other needs with review teams on that sort. But again, as long as possible, we hope to keep it open. When will I be able to submit our first claim for this grant? This is October 1, 2021. That is the first reporting cycle for the 2021-23 biennium. We have a little note there that where it is when the grant agreement is executed, whichever is later. We recognize that ODE's procurement office is going to have quite a bit of work coming into April with the amount of grants that are going out. So we do expect some delays, but our hope is that all that is processed through April or by October 1. The expenditures will be reimbursable back to July 1. That is our intent. We're working with our council currently to finalize that option, but that's definitely been a question in the past of when can you reverse back to. And then also new, if you joined us last week for one of these information sessions, this has been added since then. Is reimbursement the only option for YDD grants? We have added the startup fund option and can be requested up to 25% of a total grant award. Excited to add that as trying to help organizations who may need some startup funds to get the work going. Just a note there that these funds become available after a grant agreement is executed. And there's also what we call EGOMS. It's our electronic grant management system, has to all be approved and entered. Organizations have to be entered into it. So with the hope that that would be right around the October 1st, that those startup funds would be able to be released. So, and then as we go through the questions or through this presentation, obviously, if you have questions, please add those to the chat box. After the presentation, feel free to reach out to the email that's listed below on each slide, or also a grant manager if you know one of us directly. Once the RFA opens, we do have to switch our gears a little bit, and then all questions go to our sole point of contact, or the SPC, and that'll be all outlined in the RFA. So within the YDC and the Youth Development Division, our vision is that Oregon's youth have the opportunity to thrive and achieve their full potential. YDC aligns systems and invests in our communities to ensure equitable and effective services for youth ages 6 through 24. We support educational and career success, disrupt youth crime and violence, and affirm the strengths and safety of our youth. We value equitable access and equal opportunity, as well as youth-centered approaches within all of our grants. With that, I believe I'm turning it over to Abe.
So I'll be talking a little bit more about the council and the division. Some of you, this may be familiar to some of you. The Youth Development Division is the state agency that carries out the work under the direction of the council, often referred to as the YDC and the YDD respectively, White Council and Division. The initiatives include community investment and re-engagement grant making to youth development programs, juvenile crime prevention grant making to counties and tribal governments, compliance monitoring for juvenile protections under the Juvenile Justice, the Federal Act, JVPA, implementation of a youth re-engagement system as part of the Student Success Act. Below are our priorities, our funding priorities, identifying and removing system barriers and gaps, reducing disparities, achieve equitable outcomes, building assets, protective factors, and strength-based practices, engage, re-engage, and advance youth learners, prevent and disrupt crime and violence, and promote youth safety. Here we'll go into kind of what the funding that YDC and YDD provides overall. I'll go ahead and start with a little bit, give a little background between the juvenile crime prevention funding. We're not going to go into that. That's part of our federal funding. but that one focuses on reducing juvenile arrest, recidivism, disparities, and entry into Oregon Youth Authority, and serving youth with identified risk factors and demonstrate at-risk behaviors. What we will be getting into today is our youth grants, which focus on support, prevention, intervention services, serves youth who are disconnected or at risk of disconnecting from school or work. And here's kind of the portfolio of those grants. We have our Community Investment RFA, which is around youth violence and gang prevention, a grant called Youth Solutions, which used to be called Youth and Community. Used to be Innovation. Then we have our Youth Promise one, which used to be our Youth and Community. We have our Youth Workforce and Readiness Initiative. And then on their side, we have our Re-engagement Grants, RFA, that'll be coming up. And that'll be our Re-engagement Opportunity Grant. As we get further into this presentation, we'll go into the details of what each one of these specific grants means. Here is kind of the eligibility requirements. I'll go ahead and start with our community investment grants. Federally recognized tribes, nonprofit organizations, faith-based organizations, public benefit companies, mutual benefit corporations, county and municipal agencies, and any other local government organization or company that's conducting business in the state. And for our youth re-engagement, you'll see it's a little bit more school-oriented. School districts, public charter schools, educational service districts, federally recognized tribes, local workforce and development boards, county and municipal agencies, community colleges, alternative schools, and this includes private alternative schools, community-based organizations, and nonprofit organizations as well.
All right, thank you, Abe. So we're going to talk a little bit more about the application materials and kind of what's new to the 2021-23 biennium with the youth grants. One of the pieces that you will see when you go into our online application system is really an eligibility screener. The online application portal is something that YDD has used the past few grant cycles. It's called SM Apply or SurveyMonkey Apply. When you access it this next biennium, you'll see that there's an eligibility screener that helps applicants select the appropriate grant for them. On that side, I also want to pause just for a second, and if you look into the chat, I did paste a link to today's website, to today's presentation that you can access through our website on that if you want to, instead of seeing the screen. The regional assignments, and so that is new for the 2021-23 biennium, where applicants will be assigned into one of 11 defined regions based on your business address. And we'll talk about what that means here in just a few moments, but we are using the regional solutions map on 11 defined regions within that. Administrative costs, including all indirect costs, are allowable up to 15% of an applicant's total budget, or the federally negotiated indirect rate, and that's going to be whichever is greater. And so that's an option for you if you have a federally negotiated indirect rate. And then, as we noted earlier, startup funds, successful applicants will be eligible for startup funds up to 25% of the total budget on that piece. So when we talk about the application specifically, the format is all going to be submitted through SM Apply. If an applicant does need accommodations, then you'd reach out to the SPC regarding that. And that's those links come off of our website, so you can easily access those. Consistent format within all of the applications that we're applying. Abe covered the 5 different grants and initiatives that we're talking about today. And so you'll see a consistent question type, as well as the budget workbook is going to be the same for all of those initiatives and grants. The word limits and the scoring process is all the same for whichever one you apply for. The questions, again, are going to be based off the same information. They are tied back to the grant description itself, but it's focused on youth population, program services, service area, equity and voice, and partnerships. Included in that, then you'll also provide an organization description of who you are and who you've been serving, as well as a budget narrative. When we talk about the uploads and the supplemental materials, that's where the 2 RFAs divide up a little bit. The proposed budget worksheet, again, is a consistent format across all grants, but the difference really lies in the MOU and a letter of intent. For the re-engagement RFA, there is a letter of intent or an MOU required at the application stage. Due to our legislation, there does require a partnership is required as part of these grants, and so a formal MOU would be required during the grant negotiation stage. But you don't have to have that at an application. A letter of intent will serve for that. And then the difference being with the RFAs is that that option is optional for the community investment RFA. And then the other couple things just to be aware of, you do need to have certificate of insurance as part of these grants, as well as have an Oregon business registration. Once your application has been submitted, the application will move into review. And so the evaluation teams will be scoring based on grant and initiative specific information. And so this does require a separate application for each grant or initiative that you choose to apply for. The connection that reviewers will be looking for is links between the youth being served and the specific grant or initiative being applied for. And as we indicated earlier, we'll talk a little bit more specifics about each grant type here in just a few moments. And so we suggest that you do include some specific details to the relationship of the programming related to that grant or initiative. When we move into the awarding process, there's really two stages to that. The first round of awards are going to be using those regions, which the next slide will define a little bit further. But the single highest application for each RFA, so that's a community investment RFA and the re-engagement fund RFA, will be awarded to 11 defined regions. So those will be 11 distinct awards based on the highest application statewide. Once we move through that, then all applications will be ranked in scored order for the grant or initiative that they've applied for. And then those awards are based on the highest overall score down to when we run out of funds per initiative on that piece. You'll see the asterisk there for that regional award. The youth violence and gang prevention is not included in that regional ranking. And that's primarily because we don't have that many awards that are issued to be able to cover all the regions should they be those highest awards. So talking about the regions themselves, the geographic assignment is based off of that regional solutions map based out of the governor's office. We do intend to award a minimum of 1 grant per area based on the already established map that you can see on the screen. The placement into these regions is based on your business address. But just a little note there that applications can request alternative placement if you're serving a different region with those grants. Then the top application score in the region must meet the minimum scoring requirements that are outlined in the RFA itself. So with that, I do want to pause just to look back to Cord to see if there's any questions. I kind of lost track of the questions coming through. So Cord, if you want to jump on, or I can scan them quickly.
We've had one question. Someone was asking about whether this meeting was going to be covering EANS, the Emergency Assistance for Non-Public Schools. And no, this is only going to be covering YDD grants. If you are interested in EANS information, I've put a link in the chat to the page on ODE's site where you can find out more about that, including a schedule of upcoming deadlines and information. The question that we did just get was about whether a sub-grantee for a re-engagement grant, that is to say not the primary applicant, to fund a diploma-based program, could the same organization apply for a workforce grant for a different program within the organization? The answer is yes. So an organization that is a subawardee on a re-engagement grant may apply for workforce or any other YDD grant. And actually, within these RFAs, we were not going to have a limit on the number of applications that may be submitted by an organization. But each application should support a distinct service, youth population, and or community. You just shouldn't be submitting duplicate applications. And if we do see the same application in 2 different categories, we would reach out and determine which one you actually want to pursue. But if you're providing services, let's say a service in 2 different communities, or you're seeking grants to do different types of activities, different kinds of services, serve different youth populations, that is permissible. I see another question popped up from Sherry. Hi, Sherry. Approximately how many grant awards do you believe will be available per funding area? We don't have a count for that yet. Part of the reason is that there are ranges for awards. You can request varying amounts, so we often don't know exactly what our funding per award will be. That said, in terms of our overall budget, we're still in the legislative process, but the governor's recommended budget keeps us at the current service level, which means we actually go up just slightly for a inflationary increase. The re-engagement funding from the SSA is recommended for approval at 8.3 million. So that would be a pretty significant pot of money for re-engagement. This all is subject to legislative approval. The legislative adopted budget usually gets finalized in June or May or June for us. So we generally don't know exactly what we have until we get pretty close to the final awarding. But if all goes as planned, the best I could say is that the range of award amounts in total per grant fund will probably be very close to what it is now, although those things are subject to vary. For instance, one fund might be larger, another might be smaller. That's all to be determined. But sorry, that's not a very clear answer, but our hope is that we at least have the same funding level that we did in the previous biennium, if not a little bit higher. More questions coming in from Ellen. Did I understand correctly that an organization may apply to serve a region that may not match their business address? Yes. Paul, I'll let you kind of tackle that. I see there's one other question here from Mandy for asking for less than 100,000 for a youth re-engagement grant. I actually don't know the answer to that question. I do know that the solutions grant has is sort of more designed for smaller grant making and has a range of 20 to 100,000. And Francis asked to repeat the current titles for Youth Solutions and Youth Promise. So Youth Solutions currently, well, and we actually don't have it this biennium. There was a grant called the Innovation Grant. 2017-19 was the last biennium that there was a innovation grant as a standalone grant. Currently, 2019 to 21, it's the Workforce and Innovation Grant. So those two got combined. And what we're doing with Youth Solutions is kind of bringing back the innovation concept as a standalone piece separate from Workforce. So there is a Workforce grant and a Solutions grant. And then the Youth Promise grant would now be known as the Youth and Community Grant. We just thought that, I mean, one, we have community investments, and that can sometimes be confusing when we're talking about a grant that is part of community investments. So we're just trying to come up with some naming that I think is a little more reflective of the goals. And I think that I've covered everything, but I will pass it back to you, Paul, for that question about applying for serving a region that does not match your business address.
Absolutely. So thank you. And actually, those questions are great lead-ins. The next round of slides are actually diving specifically into the grant description with more detail from the grant managers themselves. So that region, yes, that is correct, Cord, where if an organization is serving a region outside of where their business address would be listed, they would reach out to the SPC and provide details as to why they would want to be considered in a different region as part of that work. Just kind of a note about those regions. Those regions, the number of awards would not exceed 11 per grant or RFA type, per RFA type. So majority of the awards will be coming based off of the score ranking for the statewide per initiative grant score. So just as a note for that on that. With that, I will turn that over. Yes, excuse me.
Oh, sorry. I realized that did you want to chime in on if there's an organization that wants to propose a re-engagement project, but is seeking 100,000, where should they apply?
That is a great question. And just being totally transparent, we have not discussed that as a re-engagement team. So that is a question, part of the reason why we're doing these information sessions that we will want to look closer into. My first instinct would be to the Youth Solutions, but I do want to talk about it as a team before we give more specific answer to that. So stay tuned on that, and that would be one of the updates that we'll probably add to our website.
Yeah, I'm just going to quickly say that one thing to note about this presentation is the RFAs haven't launched, so this information can change. These ranges are the ranges that we've kind of set as of now in the current draft of the RFA that exists. But it's not impossible that we could look at this question and determine that we should figure out a different way of doing things. So I appreciate you bringing that up, Andy.
Thank you. With that, I'll turn it over to Molly to talk a little bit more about the re-engagement opportunity grants.
Thanks, Paul. So the first grant type that we're going to run through is the re-engagement opportunity grants. And these are designed to reconnect and engage students who have left school or are at risk of leaving school without their diploma or credential. So the underlying goal of these opportunity grants are really to help students complete high school. And these grants can support both a new program as well as existing re-engagement programming. And services and activities and supports include outreach services, educational services, so that high school completion component is required. Students need to have access to a high school completion component, one-on-one case management, academic and career coaching, college, career, and workforce services, post-secondary education and training, support services, as well as follow-up services for previously re-engaged youth. The age range allowed is 14 to 21 years on these grants. And as Paul mentioned earlier, another component of the re-engagement opportunity grants is that partnerships for re-engagement services are required.
Great. All right. Thanks, Molly. And I'll be talking about the next few slides here. The next initiative is the Youth Workforce Readiness Initiative. Those of you who are familiar with our current grants, this will look very familiar to the current workforce grant. So this is intended to support career exploration and skill development services that ultimately will lead to sustainable living wage employment and careers. The program must currently exist, so it has to be in existence to apply for this grant. And you can see here the list of things that we would support here: existing programming that includes career-connected learning, internships and apprenticeships, soft skill development, entrepreneurship training and social enterprise, workforce reentry services for those who've been involved in the justice system, and career mentoring and counseling. The age range here is 14 to 24, and the award range is 100,000 to 200,000. And actually, one thing I'll add here also, I'm sorry, is that so this biennium, we're being very intentional about trying to kind of connect our workforce grants with our re-engagement system. And if you noticed on the previous slide, somebody hit mute. It sounds like we have a phone going off. Thank you. So on the previous slide, you noticed that the re-engagement opportunity grant covers ages 14 to 21. Our workforce grant covers 14 to 24, and we're really trying to connect our workforce grants with our re-engagement system because we know that they're very much aligned and the needs are overlapping. So some of those services that Molly listed on the previous slide included career services, some of that post-secondary training, coaching, mentoring, case management. Those might also align with some needs in a workforce grant. So if you are looking to have a re-engagement program, but you also serve youth 22 to 24 who would not fall in that re-engagement age range, and there is a workforce component to your re-engagement program, perhaps you might want to look at a workforce grant to support those re-engagement services.
Thank you, Jared. And I'm going to hit pause just for a second for the next slide. So there's a question about the partnerships within the re-engagement opportunity grants. And so the partnerships are defined as a re-engagement partner. And so it's partnering in the work to provide re-engagement services as part of that grant. And so a lot of the partnerships, for example, a youth-based or a community-based organization may partner with a school district because there is an educational pathway that is required as part of that grant. Other services might be partnering with an organization to provide mental health services or other services directly to youth. Molly, did you want to add anything to that partnership question?
No, Paul, I think those examples are really great. And the requirement on the grant is that it's at least one partnership.
All right, thank you. So Jared, I'll put the slides back up to you.
Great. Okay, so the next one is the Youth Promise Initiative. As we mentioned earlier, this is just a name change, really. This is our current youth and community grant, but the goals of the programming are really the same. This is to support existing program services, again, so it must be an existing program to apply for this. in improving and sustaining educational engagement and success for youth. So examples of things that we would fund through this initiative are mentoring programs, programs that are working with mental health, social emotional supports, culturally specific organizations that are doing culturally specific outreach and support, after school activities, pro-social services, barrier removal, and positive relationship building. So, you know, an after-school tutoring program, social emotional supports, all of those would fit very nicely into this. The age range is a bit wider here. It's 6 through 24, and the award range is 100,000 to 200,000. And finally, we have the Youth Solutions Initiative, which we mentioned a bit earlier, is also used to be referred to as the Innovation Fund. So this is a little new. This is to support programming focused on resiliency factors, leading to positive educational and workforce outcomes. So this programming really is intended to support new or innovative programming. So you do not have to be an existing program to apply for this. Supporting replication of programming to new site areas. So if you're looking to expand into a new region or to a new school district, perhaps, you might want to consider this. System level change work. So if it doesn't quite fit into one of the other initiatives that we discussed, but it's sort of working on broad systems change, that might be a good fit for this. Middle school age workforce and career exposure. So if you noticed on our workforce grants support ages 14 to 24, but if you want to have a workforce component to your program that's going to be for younger youth, that would fit well here. Delivery of mental health and or drug and alcohol treatment services, homeless support, and restorative justice practices. Those would all go really well into this initiative. And the award range, as we mentioned, is a bit smaller for this one. It's 20,000 to 100,000.
Thank you, Jared. And before we have you mute so you don't have to find it again, there's a couple questions for you. And I don't know if you have chat open, I can read them. So what about workforce events? Our program is an expo for hands-on training and apprenticeship opportunities from the event. Is that something that would be allowed as part of those workforce grants?
Let's see. I'm looking for the question here.
I dropped my 10 cents in there into the chat, but Jared, I figured you might want to consider this as well.
Yeah, I'm just reading. Let's see. Where is, and just looking for your response, Cord. Cord says he can recall a project we're carrying out a career expo type event. Let's see. However, that was not the sole purpose of the grant, and maybe that a solutions grant would be more appropriate since it might be considered. Exactly. Yeah. Systems. Oops, lost it. Systems level rather than tracking individual participants. Yeah, I would say I would probably agree. If it's focused more on that systems level work, but not so much direct service of individual youth, that would probably be best under a solutions grant. If it's not, you know, kind of a solely focused on a, you know, one of those workforce initiatives that we mentioned on those slides.
And then
Yeah,
Jared, oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry. That was kind of my thinking, Jared. That what I'm recalling is that we had a grantee who had a program where they were tracking and serving individual youth, but a major part of the program activity was a career expo that they hosted.
Mm-hmm.
Why I'm thinking it might be more appropriate for solutions is if you're hosting an event that like could be like an open to the community type event, but where you're not actually like providing ongoing services, you're not tracking participants. That to me seems like a better fit for the solutions initiative. Just based on that kind of service model.
Yeah, I would agree. I think honestly, that's not something that I've really considered up to this point, but just talking through it, that's kind of where I would lean as well. Yeah.
Yeah, that one's a really tough one. I mean, you know, unfortunately, Sarah, we don't have all the answers, even though sometimes we get some that I think we have to kind of think on. I would say when the RFAs come out, my recommendation would be to look at workforce and solutions, and based on the requirements, try to figure out what makes the most sense. It may be that once you look at that and think about your whole program and process, it might make sense one way or the other.
Well, and I'll add for Bill, our data guy, for those of you that don't know Bill does a lot of our data with YDD. The solutions grants data reporting will look slightly different than a program that's specifically focused on individual programming, which may lend you may have you lean more towards the youth solutions, just because it's more of a global data reporting versus the individual participant information. Let's see. So we have another question around the workforce grant from Cass, I believe. Can this workforce grant be used for an entrepreneurial program for K-8 charter school that brings back graduates to work and learn about job experience? So do you want to talk a little bit about the age range for the workforce and where they might find that other one, Jared?
Yeah. So if you recall, the workforce grant serves ages 14 through 24. So K through 8 would probably fit better in the solutions grant.
Right. And then,
sorry. I think that it could also be appropriate for a promise grant, depending on the scale.
Yes, that's a good call too. Yes, promise also, if you notice, serves ages 6 through 24. So that could be an option there as well. And again, I would say when that RFA comes out, you might want to read the requirements, and you can probably select which one you think fits best.
And I think that answers one of the questions of youth solutions that I saw. It can fit middle school, and it also can hit high school age youth as well. So that's a pretty broad age range on that. Another piece, there's several questions around COVID that are coming in. Cord, I don't know if you addressed those yet or not.
No, I can quickly answer those. So the question is, with COVID guidelines, some after-school programs had to register as emergency daycare. Can those programs still apply? That registration wouldn't prevent you from applying. I mean, the key consideration would be the age range of youth you're serving in the grant that you're proposing. So, you may be providing some services to youth who might be younger, but that's fine as long as what you're proposing to do with the YDD grant fits the grant requirements. That registration wouldn't prevent you from applying. How do you anticipate after school programs or training being impacted by COVID? Do you assume in-person programming will be possible? From Colleen. Hi, Colleen. I don't know. I mean, I think that we are, I think everyone is still kind of in a wait and see state right now. I'm sure that probably many of the organizations here are probably in a bit of a kind of dual planning of, if we open up, what does that look like? And if restrictions continue, how do we operate? And probably even organizations in different communities are looking at different contingencies. So I would say that, I don't think that within the RFA, we're going to sort of guide you in one direction or the other. And I don't know that that there's a recommendation we could give you in terms of how to proceed. I think that it's possible you may put a proposal in and say, this is what we're going to try to do. And then if things, if restrictions get in the way, this is how we will adapt. I don't know that that would be a bad way to approach it. But that is just, it's just a really tough question because no one honestly really knows. But I don't think that we're setting up the RFA so that, planning to provide in-person programming is permitted. I guess I'll put it that way. We're not expecting folks to just propose programming that is virtual, for example, although that may be permissible. And I think we kind of anticipate that we're going to see a lot of different projects and approaches to serving youth. And I think that in terms of how organizations are adapting, a lot of the costs of adapting for COVID are things we have covered in the current grants. And it may be that that's part of what you're looking at in what you propose is like how, what resources you need in order to be able to provide services based on whatever kinds of barriers you're facing there. Sorry, again, I'm giving a lot of squirmy answers, but we just honestly, sometimes these things are really hard to predict. So.
Absolutely. No, thank you, Cord. And I want to recognize that we do have multiple questions in the chat, but I also want to make sure that because of timing, we'll get through the next couple slides and then we'll continue to answer these questions as long as it would take past that 10 o'clock. But I do want to make sure that we get through the slides.
I see Crystal's question and I'll start with that and kind of work my way down and try to answer those in the chat while everybody else continues the presentation.
Perfect. Thank you, Cord. Abe.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and talk about our Youth Violence and Gang Prevention Grant. Previously, it was called the Youth and Gangs Grant. We changed a little bit of kind of the services and what we're kind of focusing on based on some meetings we had earlier in the fall with various past grantees, current grantees, and other stakeholders, especially around youth violence. But this grant is for services related to factors leading to participation or exposure to violent and or criminal gang activity. The services include, but they're not limited to reentry services, youth coming out of juvenile justice. Community outreach is really big, especially with a lot of the violence, at least in the Portland metro area. Trauma-informed and mental health supports, pro-social activities, mentoring, having a safe space for our youth. And case management services as well. The age range is 12 to 24, and the award range is anywhere from 50,000 to 100,000.
All right. Well, thank you, Abe, for covering that. And I have the last couple slides here. So I know we covered quite a few questions as well as a lot of information in those last 5 slides. This is a youth grant planning tool that will be uploaded onto the website, the youth development website, which I'll send out an email to any of the registered participants of this information session with links to that. This has yet to been uploaded. It should be uploaded by towards the end of the week. But you can see where kind of that initial question, are you applying for an ongoing or existing programming? And just for clarification, ongoing and existing program does not mean you have to be a YDD funded program to fit into that category. If you currently are providing services and are wishing to apply for a grant, then that would be the column that you'd want to look at to try to determine which way to go. The ages are listed on there as well. And then also then, are you applying for a new or a startup programming? That's on that right-hand side of that graphic, just to help kind of aid and direct you in the directions that you're looking for. So moving to the next slide, and then we'll jump back to those questions here briefly. So the timelines, again, the RFA process is, we don't have a defined date for the launch. That will be posted on our website, as well as ORPN, which is the ODE's procurement network. And if you haven't registered for that or one of the YDD listservs on our website, please do sign up for that to receive direct emails. We will also be sending emails out to any registered participant to these information sessions once that date is open. The RFA is open, or will be open for as long as we can. You can see that kind of that ranging from April to towards the end of June date. We do want it to be open as long as possible, up to 60 days. There will be another informational webinar, and that will be a much more formal webinar for both a community investment RFA as well as the re-engagement RFA. So 2 separate webinars that will directly address the RFA itself. And so we'll address questions both from this presentation, but also really information directly related to that once that is open. That's planned for about 2 weeks after the official RFA launch. So again, it's kind of a timeline that's posted there in green. The RFA evaluation will be happening towards the late spring, early summer months in terms of that process, with the intent to award notifications going out at the end of that process, which is probably most likely going to be in that July, August range. And then we'll begin our grant negotiation meetings, meeting with each individual grantee, successful grantee, in August, September to finalize all of that work. So again, the anticipated reimbursement will be back from, or will be to July 1, 2021. That's the start of this funding cycle. But that first reimbursement submission won't be due until October 1st on that side. And we don't have the startup funds noted, but again, there are startup funds available and will be defined in the RFA in that process. So with that, we are actually at the end of our presentation. You see here questions for upcoming YDD youth grants. So we'll turn back to the chat. I have not been monitoring it the last couple minutes. So Cord, if I'll start reading, but if there's some burning questions you want to jump on, that would be wonderful.
Yeah, I've put answers in the chat for Crystal's question. There's a question from April about, actually forgot which one that was. I got to look back up. April asked if school districts are permitted to apply for the community investment grants. Districts I know are named in the eligible entities for re-engagement. Abe, do you know the answer to that one?
Yeah, they can apply depending on the programming they're proposing fits within the scope of the grant initiatives in the community investments. There's nothing saying you can't apply there.
Yeah, and I think it really comes down to like the services you're proposing and the grant itself. Um, I mean, I think, probably we have definitely seen, for example, alternative schools, which often are community-based organizations and provide often different services from, say, a public school, have been funded with these grants. I know that some schools, public schools, have been funded through grants in the past. I don't know about districts necessarily, but I don't believe districts are prohibited. So I think it's really about the appropriateness of the service based on the description of the grant.
Exactly.
And then, yeah, so the question from Crystal was about, I've put some information. You can apply for different programs and you can apply multiple times, but you cannot apply multiple times for the same program. There was a question about how we define youth experiencing homelessness. And I believe housing instability would also be something that programming may sort of address. That's totally allowed. And the question from Gabrielle was about a proposal. One, is it permitted to provide for expansion of existing programming? Yes, like that's actually a lot of what we support is someone trying to grow, reach more youth, strengthen partnerships, expand the work. That's all totally allowable. And probably could be done depending on the type of work you're doing in multiple grant streams. Capital expenses, yes, I would say with your budget, anything is subject to approval in the grant negotiation process. So there are things that are prohibited. You cannot purchase motorized vehicles, as my understanding. Automobiles, I think, is what we say. I suppose there are types of motorized vehicles that might be appropriate. Bicycles for youth, we don't say vehicles broadly are prohibited. Transportation generally is supported through the provision of like vouchers or bus passes or things of that nature. Capital expenses such as like equipment for computers, things like that. There's a line item usually in the budget. We have a line for equipment purchases. You cannot purchase real estate, but I believe making modifications to a space is not prohibited. And we recognize that with COVID, that's actually been something that folks need to do in order to create, to make their spaces more compliant or safe for young people. So that is allowed. You may propose that. But I think that it's just important to be able to kind of talk about what you're planning to do once you get to that negotiation, if you are, if you intend to fund you. And I'll stop there. I think I'm looking to see where I left off, Paul, so you can start.
Sounds good.
I think, Anna is the next one there.
Oh, okay. I had one up regarding a young parent program startup who will have a child care center to assist for children of parents supporting the parent to re-engage in high school and community college. I'd encourage other grant managers to jump in, but my understanding is that would be an allowable cost, even if the children of the program participant is under age 6. If you're 6, you could provide some childcare services or some funding towards that, specifically within re-engagement. But I'd turn to Abe if Youth Solutions and Promise would be allowed with that.
For the community investments, the lowest we can go is to age 6. So childcare price for 6 and up may be allowable, depending on the program. There is some there, but anything younger, I think our legislation prohibits anything younger than 6. So that's kind of right now where we're at with that. But I do understand the need for that and those services.
And I think if you're providing childcare for the children of youth between the ages, between teens and young adults who are in the age range we're serving, I believe that is permissible, right?
I'd have to go double check on that, to be quite honest. See how that works. But I understand that might be something we'll have to discuss and add into the presentation later.
Okay.
I'm kind of scanning through, you're seeing us look through questions at the same time we're trying to respond. So some questions around youth who are homeless or have instability in their housing. So most of the survey, yes, we have talked about youth who are homeless as categories within it, but your program can serve youth of any of those categories with it. So if they are not designated as homeless, depending on your grant application, which one you're applying for should be able to apply to any youth as outlined in your application. So would spring 2021 ROG outcomes assist an applicant scoring in the 21-23 process? I think that's a great question. I'm also going to broaden it to include all of the applications. No, there isn't any weighted or support in terms of if you have had a prior YDD grant. This is a completely separate and new process within it on that side. So there is no weighting with regards to that. So scrolling back, and again, we've got lots of questions, so thank you. I was curious, each of these presentations have been different, so I appreciate all the questions coming in. Is an organization able to apply for more than one grant? Yes, an organization can. The main piece being that if you're applying for multiple grants, it should not be serving the same youth for the same purpose. You would need to define how that looks different in that work. Let's see, going back through, Abe or other grant managers, have you seen other questions we've missed? There's a lot coming in. I see a bunch of new messages as well. So
Yeah, I'm looking through them as well.
all right. Just a note on time. Obviously, we will stay online to make sure we get your questions answered as best as we can. But we are done with the presentation, so that if you are needing to go to a different meeting, which I know is a lot of us, but we will stay online to answer your questions. But feel free to sign off if need be. All right. So Cord answered a question regarding rent. It can be, yes, it can, rent and other costs associated with that can be part of the operating costs. On that question, it looks like Cord has answered a question for Anne. Let me see what the question for Anne is. It's around COVID guidelines. Some after-school programs have had to register as emergency childcare. So Cord answered that as yes, we do not have a restriction based on that registration. Key consideration is the age of youth that you will be serving directly and the programming that fits the purpose or the requirements that you're after. Yes, a video presentation, the video of this, a recording of this presentation will be uploaded later this week, early next. Just as a note, if you want to do that, we have held off on putting that because we wanted to make sure we had the most accurate presentation available for people. Also, just to note that if you did access the link that I pasted in the chat, please don't, I would go back to the website and access the documents directly from there versus a saved document on your computer, just as these have updated every day since we began these presentations. So please do access the most up-to-date information. All right, Cord, keep looking back to you. I know you can't see me looking at you, but I'm looking at you to see if you see any other ones.
Yeah, and I'm just going back to the chat. I've been dropping some answers in. You can read them off if you want.
Perfect.
I'm trying to make sure.
Yeah.
I'm seeing a few that I missed. I'm just getting back to them.
Yeah, Jared?
It looks like there is, I'm not sure if we've answered a question from Thomas about 2020. Yeah, Cord? Yeah, okay.
All right.
Yeah, and I mean, I'll just quickly comment on that. So Thomas, yeah, he asked specifically about the re-engagement opportunity grants and whether outcomes from those would be factored in. I mean, one, that's such a short time run. It's a pretty limited, I think, sample size. And overall for 2019 to 21, recognizing that so many grants had plans that were thwarted by COVID, and both their outcomes and service population plans, there's been so much adjustment in order to adapt and still find success. With the re-engagement projects, it's been a very short run, and a lot of them are really just getting started. So we didn't think it was really fair to assess a new proposal based on the outcomes from 2019 to 21. We really kind of want to give folks a clean slate and just have the evaluators judge applications based on the content of that application. So
Thank you,
that's a great
Cord.
question.
Yeah. Great question. I see a question from Anna. A partner we are contracting with is based in a different county than we are, but services are being provided in our county. Is this a problem? No, it is not a problem in terms of providing that service. Again, I know the regional piece is a little bit confusing within that. That is really being used for YDD is trying to ensure geographic distribution of grants at a minimum. And so that's the reason why that's incorporated into the scoring. Once those awards are done, any of our grantees will not be necessarily considered into the region, nor will affect your services in that region. As part of the application, you'll define what your service area is and what that looks like in that response. So thank you for that question, and hopefully I added a little clarity to each of the regions. And again, these are for a 2-year biennium grant cycle. So these would be from July 2021. July 1st, 2021 through June 30, 2023. So great question on that and important clarification there. All right. So with that, it looks like we've slowed down a bit on the questions. I know a few people have signed off on it. And like I said, we will stay on the call should you have more questions on that. But I do want to open up. We kind of started with if anybody had some great success stories around their work in the COVID era. We are definitely interested in hearing those and would appreciate if people would be interested in sharing in the chat or online. We do understand those that are having to sign off to go to different meetings because we are now at 10 o'clock. I just thought I'd put that note out there as well. If you have a story, feel free to unmute yourself and join us.
I'll share a quick story. My name is Deltra Ferguson. I am the Executive Director for Resolve Center for Dispute Resolution and Restorative Justice in Southern Oregon. We do restorative justice services with our juvenile justice system, been doing it for many, many years. And we have a program called VIA, which we've been studying for 10 years, and it reduces recidivism for our youth. And we go through the program. At any rate, when COVID struck us, it really struck us hard. And I know it struck all of you hard, and I really feel for all of you who are struggling to get through this. One of our hotshots got after it right away. He converted or adapted our VIA program to online delivery and has been doing that for the better part of a year now. He hates it and he can't wait to get back to in-person delivery. And that's that's our goal, is we're heading for that. And we hope we'll get there sooner than later, but we're of course being safe. Anyway, it's a success because a lot of very spirited. I really admire what he did. He did a good job, and he helped a lot of kids, even through this really rotten time for kids. Jiminy Christmas. That's all I have to say.
That's one. Thank you. Is it Beltra? I hope I'm saying that right. That's an awesome story. Thank you for providing that. Restorative justice I'm having been trained in it a bit. I can see how that would be a challenge to do virtually on that engagement. So that's impressive. So thank you for the story and success. Is there somebody else that would like to share?
I would love to share.
All right, thank you.
Sherry. And I just really feel that the YDD youth grants were, really for a time such as this. And so many kids were isolated, and we have a few of the YDD grants. And what was happening is that we were able to continue services when kids were isolated. And many of these kids were, really suffering with loneliness, and our programs were the ones that were still able to keep that link and access. And I will tell you, almost on a weekly basis, reported by kids that we had reduced self-harm, and in many cases, like stopped suicide when they were having suicide ideation. And then there was one case where the knock on the door came for the outreach for that youth, and they revealed that they were thinking about it, and we came at that time, and it turned it all around and able to connect them with further services. And the other one is our community also was devastated by a fire, and our workforce grant was huge in helping older youth connect with employment and new career opportunities. One of our placements actually burnt down, one of our automotive places, and another automotive place stepped up and took the placement of all youth. And overall, with the youth reporting and both of the grants all measured in collective, that we saw a 44% reduction in gang activity through these outreaches, 55% reduction in self-harm. And these are times when you would think all these things are increasing, but being there at the right time and YDD made that possible. So thank you guys for your support. And it truly has changed the lives of youth in our community, and in cases have saved a life.
That's awesome. Both those stories and all those testimonies is just wonderful, and part of the reason why we wanted to make sure that we have people share out, because I think it's important to ground our work and celebrate those that are out there doing the hard work of reconnecting youth and getting youth the supports they need. So thank you both, Deltra and Sherry, for sharing those stories. It looks like people are signing off. Again, want to leave the space for other stories or questions, and we'll hang on the line here for a few more minutes. But it's been a pleasure, and each one of these community meetings has been different each time, so it's always exciting. And Deltra, it looked like you were raising or had a comment. Oh, okay. Oh, you're waving off. Thank you. I appreciate it.
I just have a comment. This is Mandy Decker from Wallowa County, and where we've been pretty low risk. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can hear you
Okay,
loud and clear.
perfect.
Thank you.
We've been pretty low risk, but like everyone else, COVID sort of rocked our programming world. Like, how do we offer services? We don't serve a lot of youth. We have YDC, the YDD JCP money. So comes to the Department of Youth Services, which is the juvenile department. And we have a summer outdoor program, and we offer child protection unit in 2 of our schools, well, all 3 of our schools, and then the social and emotional learning also in our school districts. So we've been fortunate that all of our school districts have been in session since September. So we have been able to offer all that learning, and our school districts were good enough to let one of us come into the schools to train. Usually all 3 of us are in, but we specified someone for each school district, so we didn't have everyone in the schools. But our summer outdoor program was the one that we sort of had a scrounge for. It's where we take kids to do outdoor things in Wallowa County. And we just, Haley, who's sitting next to me, and then Ron, one of our prevention coordinators, just really thought outside the box, figured out how to get these kids where they needed to be. Maybe we didn't take all the kids in one car. Maybe the kids met us there, or the kids that could ride in the car wore masks. But we were doing a lot of hiking and paddleboarding and mountain biking. So it did work out, but it was us changing our programming. And again, I concur with what Sherry said. I mean, a lot of it was reaching those isolated kids, some of those kids that weren't on our radar, but should have been because they were at home doing nothing, playing video games. But I will say, I think why we're looking at the YDD piece of this is we realize there's some outliers in our community where there just isn't a lot of things available. And so we're looking at kids that are 20 or 30 miles away that it's hard for us to reach, and parents don't have transportation. So, it has made us look at where did our kids falling through the cracks? And I think that was a good eye opener for us. One, I think we get super lax in thinking that all kids accessibility is there, but this has given us a good opportunity to look at where we could put other programming or just other things so that all kids had the same opportunity. So I do think YDD for that, and the opportunity to have all this funding so that we can put in for those those populations that we don't always serve, but that definitely need it.
That's wonderful. And I think that really highlights the flexibility. I know joining this team kind of mid COVID era that we've had a lot of conversations around. So I appreciate you sharing the flexibility and the options that YDD has provided, and also highlighting the fact of the differences. So Cord.
Yeah. Hey, Mandy. You kind of reminded me of something that might be worth pointing out. So, I know you're the juvenile department there in Wallowa County, right?
Mm-hmm.
Juvenile departments, county juvenile departments are eligible to apply for community investment grants. I know you received JCP grant, I believe. And I'm going to guess based on population size, you probably receive like the formula standard grant.
Correct.
And if you're kind of identifying a need for services that go beyond what you have in your JCP plan and beyond what you have capacity for in your JCP grant, you could look at one of these community investment grants as a way to sort of seek additional funding to do something more than what you're doing in your JCP work. So that may be something that you're considering. So I figured I'd just kind of say that in case anyone else from another county juvenile department is on the call, that we recognize that in a lot of counties in the state, you're really the primary youth serving agency in so many ways. And I remember meeting you a few years ago and talking to you about your work there. So just want to kind of name that as a thing that, is possible to look at with these grants.
Thanks, Cord. And I think that's where we're sort of at. Our JCP has opened us up to some prevention stuff, which has been amazing, but we feel like we need more. So, we're looking at maybe Wallowa. It's 20 miles away. Parents have a hard time getting here for parenting classes or just a youth center. There's nothing for the youth down there. And so, yeah, we're just brainstorming. It'll be something. You'll see our name on something. We need to figure out what that looks like. So.
Awesome. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you. So with that, again, thank you to all who shared, and the testimonies is awesome. I always like ending a conversation in that way. So it's always a highlight to my day. So with that, we will go ahead and sign off. This information will be posted that we do have it currently, but there'll be some updates coming out, I'm sure, in the next week or so. So please stay tuned. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.